Jiho wiped the dust from his helmet visor and stared at the massive crystal towers rising from the dead planet's surface. Kepler 442c had been lifeless for thousands of years, but these structures still gleamed like frozen lightning against the orange sky. He adjusted his oxygen recycler and walked closer to what looked like the remains of a great library. The Galactic Council had sent him here to catalog another dead civilization, just like he had done on 50 other worlds. It was routine work for a xenoarchaeologist, but Jiho enjoyed the mystery of discovering how ancient peoples had lived and died. This planet was different, though. The crystals hummed with stored energy, and his scanner showed data patterns that were incredibly complex. He activated his communication device and called his research partner back on the orbiting ship. "Hyunbi, you need to see this," he said, his voice crackling through the thin atmosphere. "These aren't just buildings, they're massive data storage units." Hyunbi's voice came back through the static. "How massive are we talking, Jiho?" "Big. Enough to hold the complete history of a galactic civilization," he replied, running his scanner along one of the crystal walls. "Maybe bigger than that." Jiho found what appeared to be an entrance and stepped inside the first tower. The walls immediately lit up with soft blue light, responding to his presence. Symbols and images began flowing across the crystal surfaces like water. He had seen many alien languages in his career, but these symbols felt different. They seemed almost familiar, like something he had seen in dreams. He spent the next few hours mapping the interior and taking readings from different crystal formations. Each tower seemed to contain different types of information. Some held what looked like scientific data, others contained artistic works, and one entire tower appeared to be dedicated to military records. But it was the central tower that made Jiho's hands shake as he approached it. The moment he stepped inside, the entire structure came alive. Holographic star maps filled the air around him, showing the galaxy as it had existed tens of thousands of years ago. Solar systems danced in the air, connected by lines that showed trade routes and communication networks. Jiho recognized some of the star patterns, but others were completely foreign to him. He activated his recording equipment and began documenting everything he saw. The holographic display seemed to respond to his movements, zooming in when he focused on particular systems and providing more detailed information about specific planets. It was the most advanced interface he had ever encountered, far beyond anything the current galactic civilizations could create. As he explored the star map, Jiho noticed something that made his blood run cold. There, in the section showing what he recognized as the local group, was a small yellow star with several planets orbiting around it. The third planet from the star was marked with symbols that glowed brighter than all the others. Jiho zoomed in on the system and gasped. It was Earth's solar system exactly as it existed today, but according to the timestamp on this data, the map was over 50,000 years old. The planet Earth was labeled with symbols that Jiho couldn't read, but below the alien text was something even more disturbing. The entire system was surrounded by warning markers. Red symbols pulsed around the solar system like danger signs, and connecting lines showed that this one small system had been flagged by multiple different civilizations across the galaxy. Jiho's hands trembled as he activated his emergency communication channel. "Hyunbi, drop everything and get down here now," he said. "Bring the linguistic analysis equipment and the deep-time dating tools." "What did you find?" Hyunbi asked. "Something that's going to change everything we know about human space," Jiho replied. "Earth has a name in this database, and it's older than any civilization we've ever discovered." While waiting for Hyunbi to arrive, Jiho continued exploring the data. He found references to Earth scattered throughout multiple sections of the archive. Military reports mentioned the system. Scientific databases contained detailed biological scans of the planet. Most disturbing of all, historical records from dozens of different civilizations all contained final entries that mentioned the solar system before going completely silent. Hyunbi arrived 3 hours later with a full analysis team and a shuttle full of equipment. She was a linguistic specialist who had cracked more alien languages than anyone else in the Council's archaeological division. If anyone could translate these symbols, it would be her. "Show me what you found," she said, setting up her translation. Computers inside the crystal tower. Jiho guided her through the holographic interface to the Earth system. Hyunbi's eyes widened as she saw the ancient star map, but when Jiho pointed to the symbols marking Earth, her face went pale. "This can't be right," she whispered, running the symbols through her translation database. The linguistic patterns match several dead languages from the Galactic Core region, but they're combined in ways I've never seen before. She worked in silence for 2 hours, cross-referencing symbol patterns and running probability analyses on different translation possibilities. Finally, she looked up at Jiho with an expression of absolute terror. "The name they gave Earth translates to Hadak Prime," she said quietly. In the ancient core languages, Hadak means something like forge or breeding ground, but specifically for weapons or warriors. The prime designation means it's the primary source or origin point. Jiho felt like the artificial gravity in his suit had suddenly failed. "So Earth's ancient name means what exactly?" Yunbi checked her translations again before answering. "The Forge of Warriors, or more literally, the primary breeding ground for battleborn ones." They spent the rest of the day digging deeper into the database. What they found painted an increasingly terrifying picture. The warning symbols around Earth's solar system translated to phrases like, "danger to all life," "avoid at all costs," and most chillingly, "where Deathbringers are born." Every reference to Hadak Prime in the ancient records described the same pattern. Civilizations would be thriving peacefully for thousands of years. Then someone would make contact with or get too close to the third planet of the Sol system. Within a few generations, those civilizations would be completely extinct. The archives contained detailed reports from multiple species describing encounters with what they called the Pale Ones from Hadak. These reports described beings that looked exactly like modern humans, but the ancient witnesses wrote about them with absolute terror. They described humans as creatures that could not be negotiated with, could not be reasoned with, and seemed to exist only to spread conflict and destruction across the galaxy. As Jiho and Yunbi compiled their findings, they realized they were looking at evidence of a cycle that had repeated itself multiple times across galactic history. Every few thousand years, something would awaken on Earth. Humanity would spread across the stars like a plague of violence, and then they would mysteriously vanish again, leaving dead worlds in their wake. The most recent entries in the database were nearly 50,000 years old, describing how the Hadak swarm had gone dormant after consuming most of the galactic civilizations. The final entry was a warning left by the last surviving species, telling anyone who found the records to stay away from the Sol system at all costs. Jiho looked at Yunbi as the horrible implications became clear. "According to this database, humanity isn't a young species just starting to explore space," he said slowly. "They're an ancient plague that's been dormant for 50,000 years. Yunbi nodded grimly. "And if this cycle is real, then humanity's recent expansion into space might mean they're starting to wake up again." They gathered all their data and prepared to leave Kepler 442c. As their shuttle lifted off from the planet's surface, Jiho took one last look at the crystal towers. Somewhere in those ancient records was the complete history of humanity's previous rampages across the galaxy, and evidence that every major extinction event in galactic history could be traced back to Earth. The question that terrified them both was simple. If the cycle was beginning again, was there any way to stop it, or was the galaxy doomed to repeat the same pattern of destruction that had played out for hundreds of thousands of years? Taijun read the classified report for the 5th time and still couldn't believe what he was seeing. As Director of Council Intelligence, he had access to information that could topple governments and start wars, but nothing had ever made him feel as cold as these findings from Kepler 442c. He activated his secure communication system and sent an encrypted message to his best analyst. "So Young, report to my office immediately," he typed. "Bring everything you have on ancient galactic extinction events." So Young arrived within minutes, carrying 3 data tablets and looking curious about the emergency summons. She was the Council's top specialist in pattern analysis and had an unusual talent for finding connections between seemingly unrelated events across galactic history. "What do you need, Director?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. Tae-jun handed her Jiho and Yunbi's report without saying a word. He watched her expression change as she read through the findings. Her curiosity turned to confusion, then to concern, and finally, to the same cold fear that had been eating at him since he first received the data. "This has to be wrong," So-young said, looking up from the tablet. "Humans can't be an ancient species. We have complete records of their development from primitive tool users to spacefaring civilization." "That's what I thought too," Tae-jun replied. "But I need you to verify this independently. Check it against every database we have access to, and tell me if there's any possibility this could be accurate." So-young spent the next week buried in the Council's deepest archives. She pulled records from every major archaeological expedition of the past century, cross-referenced extinction data from hundreds of dead civilizations, and ran pattern analysis programs on galactic historical timelines. What she found made her hands shake as she compiled her report. The pattern was everywhere once you knew what to look for. So-young discovered references to Hadak Prime in the ruins of civilizations scattered across the galaxy. The Vorthan Empire, which had ruled 1,000 systems before mysteriously vanishing 30,000 years ago, had left behind warning beacons around their former territory. When translated properly, those warnings all said the same thing: beware, the return of the Pale Ones. The crystalline consciousness, a hive-mind species that had existed for over 1,000,000 years, had dedicated their final thoughts to documenting an encounter with beings from a cursed yellow star. Their description of these beings matched human appearance perfectly, but their behavior was described in terms usually reserved for natural disasters or plagues. Even more disturbing, So-young found evidence that the galaxy's current major civilizations all had founding myths that described their ancestors fleeing from some great catastrophe. When she compared the timelines, every single one of these great catastrophes had occurred during periods when the ancient records showed activity from Hadak Prime. She brought her findings to Tae-jun along with a request for additional resources. "Director, I need access to the military's deep-time monitoring stations," she said. "If this pattern is real, there should be physical evidence in the cosmic background radiation." Tae-jun authorized the request and assigned additional team members to help with the investigation. Minho, a cultural anthropologist, was brought in to analyze human behavior patterns. Hyun-woo, the Council's top military strategist, was asked to run tactical simulations based on the ancient records. Minho's findings were deeply unsettling. He had spent years studying human culture as part of the Council's first contact protocols, but he had never looked at their behavior through the lens of the ancient warnings. When he did, patterns emerged that made perfect sense and terrified him completely. "Human entertainment is almost entirely focused on conflict," he reported to the team. "Their sports involve ritualized combat, their games simulate warfare, their literature celebrates violence and conquest. Even their children play with toy weapons from the moment they can walk." He had compiled statistics on human recreational activities and found that over 80% involved some form of competition, strategy, or simulated violence. Their most popular forms of entertainment were stories about war, survival, and domination over hostile forces. "Most species use entertainment to reinforce social bonding and cooperation," Minho explained. "Humans use it to practice for conflict." Hyun-woo's military analysis was even more alarming. He had taken the ancient descriptions of human expansion patterns and compared them to current human space colonization efforts. The match was nearly perfect. They're following the exact same expansion strategy described in the archives, he told the team. Rapid settlement of resource-rich systems, establishment of heavily defended outposts, and systematic mapping of potential threats and targets. He showed them holographic displays of human colonial expansion over the past 50 years. Every new human settlement was positioned to control strategic resources or shipping lanes. Their military installations were placed to maximize coverage of potential invasion routes. Even their supposedly peaceful research stations were located at points that would serve as perfect staging areas for future military operations. The humans claim they're expanding for exploration and trade, Hyun-woo said grimly. But their actual expansion pattern is identical to what military strategists would recommend for preparing a galactic conquest. The team's investigation expanded to include biological and psychological analysis. They requested tissue samples from human diplomatic personnel and ran detailed scans of human physiology. What they discovered added another layer of horror to their findings. Humans were incredibly resilient compared to other sapient species. Their bone density, muscle fiber efficiency, and cardiovascular systems were all optimized for survival in extreme conditions. Their pain tolerance was off the charts, their healing factor was abnormally fast, and their ability to adapt to hostile environments was unlike anything seen in other intelligent species. It's like they evolved in a state of constant warfare, the biological analyst reported. Every aspect of their physiology suggests adaptation to chronic stress, violence, and survival pressure. The psychological profiles were equally disturbing. Humans showed unusual patterns of aggression, territorial behavior, and group loyalty that resembled pack predators more than typical sapient species. Their decision-making processes were heavily influenced by threat assessment and resource competition, even in peaceful situations. As the evidence mounted, Taijun realized they were looking at something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The humans weren't just another species joining the galactic community. They were a weapon that had been sleeping for 50,000 years. The final piece of evidence came from the deep-time monitoring stations. So Young had requested data on cosmic radiation patterns around the Sol system, looking for signs of the periodic activity mentioned in the ancient records. What she found confirmed their worst fears. Every major galactic extinction event of the past 200,000 years coincided exactly with increased energy emissions from Earth's solar system. The pattern was unmistakable. Something would stir on Earth, radiation levels would spike for several thousand years, and then everything would go quiet again, while civilizations across the galaxy died out. The most recent spike had begun 50 years ago, exactly when humans had developed space travel and started expanding beyond their home system. Taijun called an emergency meeting with the Council's senior leadership. He presented the team's findings in a secure conference room, deep beneath the Council headquarters. As he laid out the evidence, he watched the faces of the galaxy's most powerful leaders go pale with terror. The implications are clear, he concluded. Humanity isn't a young species ascending to the stars. They're an ancient plague that periodically awakens to consume the galaxy, and all evidence suggests they're entering an active phase right now. The room fell silent as the council leaders absorbed the information. Finally, Supreme Chancellor Dongmin spoke. "How certain are you of these findings?" he asked quietly. "The pattern analysis shows a 97% probability that the correlation is real," Taijun replied. "The physical evidence, behavioral analysis, and historical records all support the same conclusion." Dongmin looked around the room at the other council leaders. Fear was written on every face. "Then we need to decide what to do about it," he said grimly. "Because if this cycle is real, the galaxy may have very little time left." Supreme Chancellor Dongmin stared at the classified report spread across the conference table and felt the weight of galactic civilization pressing down on his shoulders. Around the table sat the most powerful beings in known space, but they all looked like frightened children as they processed the implications of what they had learned. He activated the room's highest security protocols and sealed the chamber against any possible surveillance. What they were about to discuss could not be allowed to leak until they decided how to handle it. "Before we proceed," Dongmin said slowly, "I want everyone to understand that the information in this room could cause the collapse of galactic civilization if it becomes public knowledge." The inner circle consisted of 12 representatives from the galaxy's most advanced species. Each of them controlled military forces that could destroy star systems, but none of them had ever faced a threat like this. Yun Ah, the council's chief biologist, activated her presentation display and began showing the results of her analysis of human physiology. The holographic human that appeared in the center of the table looked deceptively fragile compared to the other sapient species represented in the room. "We've been thinking about humans wrong from the very beginning," Yuna said, her voice tight with suppressed fear. We assumed they were a typical carbon-based species with standard biological limitations. She highlighted different systems in the holographic human body as she spoke. Their skeletal structure is designed to absorb massive impact forces. Their muscle fibers can generate power outputs that should be impossible for their body mass, and their nervous system processes pain and trauma in ways that allow them to continue fighting with injuries that would incapacitate any other known species. The hologram shifted to show human cardiovascular and respiratory systems. Their heart and lungs are oversized for their body frame, designed to maintain peak performance under extreme stress for extended periods. Most disturbing of all, their brain chemistry produces compounds during violence that actually improve their cognitive function and physical coordination. Dongmin watched as the other council members absorbed this information with growing horror. "You're saying humans are biologically optimized for warfare?" "I'm saying humans are biologically optimized for constant warfare," Yuna replied. "Everything about their physiology suggests evolution in an environment where extreme violence was not just common but necessary for survival." Jae Sung, the council's historian, stood up next and activated his own display. Ancient symbols and star charts filled the air above the table as he presented his analysis of the historical records. "The pattern spans over 200,000 years, he said grimly. "Every major galactic civilization that we've discovered, evidence of has gone through the same cycle, and it always ends the same way." The display showed a timeline of galactic history with civilizations rising and falling in regular patterns. Advanced species emerge, develop space travel, spread across multiple systems, reach their peak development, and then suddenly vanish completely, usually within a few thousand years of their peak. He zoomed in on specific examples. The Vorthan. Empire controlled over 1,000 systems and had technology we still can't duplicate, but their entire civilization disappeared in less than a century, leaving only ruins and warning beacons. The timeline showed dozens of similar examples. Great. Civilizations that had ruled vast territories suddenly going extinct with minimal evidence of what had destroyed them. But when we look at the warnings they left behind, when we properly translate their final records, they all describe the same thing. Jae Sung continued. Contact with beings from a specific star system, followed by invasion, conquest, and the complete destruction of their species. He highlighted the Sol system on each historical period. Every single extinction event coincides with increased activity from Earth's solar system, and the descriptions of the invaders match human appearance and behavior patterns exactly. Kyung-soo, the council's xenopsychologist, presented the most disturbing findings of all. His analysis of human behavioral patterns had revealed something that made everyone in the room question whether peaceful coexistence with humanity was even possible. Humans don't just practice warfare, he explained, showing psychological profiles and behavioral analysis data. They are psychologically incapable of existing in a truly peaceful state. The display showed human brain scans during various activities. When humans engage in competitive or violent activities, their brain chemistry produces a cocktail of compounds that improve their cognitive function, increase their physical capabilities, and create what they describe as euphoric feelings. He switched to show comparative scans from other species. Most sapient species experience stress and reduced cognitive function during conflict situations. But humans experience enhanced performance, and what can only be described as addiction-like pleasure responses. Even in their current peaceful phase, humans structure their entire society around simulated conflict, Kyung-soo continued. Their education systems are competitive rather than collaborative. Their economic structures are based on resource competition rather than resource sharing, and their social hierarchies are established through dominance rather than consensus. The psychological analysis painted a picture of a species that was fundamentally incompatible with the cooperative, peaceful civilizations that made up the current galactic community. The ancient records describe humans as the endless legion and those who cannot be satisfied, Kyung-soo concluded. Based on my analysis of their psychology, these descriptions are accurate. Humanity appears to be a species that can only exist in a state of expansion and conquest. Dongmin looked around the table at the other council members. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying, but he needed to hear it all before making any decisions. "What about their current expansion into space?" he asked. "How does that fit the pattern?" Hyun-woo, the military strategist, stood up and activated a holographic map of human space. Red dots marked human colonies and outposts, connected by lines showing trade routes and military patrol patterns. "Their expansion strategy is textbook preparation for galactic conquest," he said without preamble. "Every human colony is positioned to control strategic resources or key shipping lanes. Their military outposts provide coverage for potential invasion routes, and their exploration vessels are systematically mapping the defensive capabilities of every species they encounter." The map showed human expansion patterns overlaid with ancient invasion routes documented in the archaeological records. The match was nearly perfect. They claimed to be exploring for scientific knowledge and peaceful trade, but their actual behavior matches military doctrine for preparing a multi-front galactic war. Hyun-woo continued. "Their diplomatic missions gather intelligence on military capabilities. Their trade agreements establish supply lines through strategic territories, and their cultural exchange programs are collecting detailed information on the psychological vulnerabilities of other species." The military analysis showed that humanity was unconsciously following the same preparation patterns that had preceded every previous galactic catastrophe. As the presentations concluded, the room fell into a heavy silence. The evidence was undeniable. Humanity was not just another species joining the galactic community. They were an ancient weapon that had awakened from dormancy and was preparing to repeat a cycle of destruction that had played out multiple times across galactic history. Finally, Dongmin spoke. "The question before us is simple," he said quietly. "Do we attempt to contain this threat before it fully awakens, or do we try to find some way to coexist with a species that appears to be biologically and psychologically incapable of peaceful coexistence?" The debate that followed was heated and desperate. Some council members argued for immediate military action against human space. Others suggested attempting to negotiate some form of containment agreement, and a few proposed trying to redirect human expansion away from populated areas of the galaxy. But as the discussion continued, one terrible fact became increasingly clear. Every previous galactic civilization had tried all of these approaches, and none of them had worked. The humans always found a way to break free from any containment. They never honored peace agreements for more than a few generations, and attempts to redirect their expansion only taught them about new territories to conquer. As the emergency session stretched into its second day, the council members gradually accepted the horrible truth that their predecessors had faced. There might be no solution to the human problem except the complete destruction of Earth and every human colony in space. The only question was whether they would have the courage to act before humanity fully awakened and began the next cycle of galactic extinction. In-ho was having the worst day of his career as a council communications officer, and it was about to get infinitely worse. He had been working the night shift in the secure communications center when an automated system update had malfunctioned, causing several classified files to be accidentally transmitted across multiple diplomatic channels. He stared at his screen in horror as he realized what had happened. The files about Hadak Prime, the ancient warnings about humanity, and the Council's investigation findings had just been broadcast to embassy computers across the galaxy. Within minutes, his supervisor burst into the communications center. "In-ho, tell me you didn't just send classified intelligence data to every major government in the galaxy," she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled panic. "It was an automated error," In-ho stammered. "The system update corrupted the security protocols and sent everything in the overnight queue to the standard diplomatic distribution list." They both watched in growing horror as confirmation signals came back from embassy computers on hundreds of worlds. The most sensitive intelligence discovery in galactic history had just become public knowledge. The first responses came within hours. Emergency diplomatic messages flooded the Council's communication systems as governments across the galaxy demanded explanations, confirmations, and immediate meetings about the human situation. The reaction was swift and absolute. The Altarian Empire, which had been negotiating a military alliance with humanity for the past 2 years, sent a terse message canceling all treaties and recalling their diplomatic staff from human space immediately. The message contained only one line of explanation: "We do not negotiate with extinction events." On the trading world of Nexus Prime, the Galactic Stock Exchange crashed within hours as investors realized the implications of the leaked intelligence. Shares in any company with human business connections became worthless overnight. Interstellar shipping companies canceled all routes through human space, and panic selling caused the complete collapse of several major trading houses. Nari, Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, found herself trapped in a nightmare that she didn't understand. She had been attending a routine diplomatic reception when security forces surrounded her and informed her that she was being confined to quarters for her own protection. "I don't understand what's happening," she told the security chief as armed guards escorted her back to the human embassy. "What? Has Earth done wrong?" The security chief wouldn't meet her eyes. "Ambassador, I've been ordered not to discuss the situation with you for your own safety and the safety of my personnel." Within hours, the human embassy was completely isolated. The diplomatic staff found themselves cut off from all communication. Networks, their security clearances revoked and their movements restricted to the embassy building. Alien diplomats who had been friends for years suddenly refused to take their calls or acknowledge their presence. Nari watched from her office window as crowds gathered outside the embassy. The faces in the crowd showed something she had never seen directed at humans before: absolute terror. These weren't angry protesters demanding policy changes. These were frightened beings who looked at the embassy like it contained a deadly plague. On Earth, the first signs that something was wrong came when the regular communication channels with alien governments suddenly went silent. Siok Jin, a human xenologist working at the Council's Cultural Exchange Center on Earth, tried repeatedly to contact his alien colleagues about their ongoing research projects. Every call went unanswered. Every message was returned as undeliverable. The research facilities that had been bustling with activity from multiple species just days before were now completely empty of non-human personnel. "Something's wrong," Siok Jin told his human colleagues as they gathered in the empty research center. "All of our alien partners have disappeared overnight." The human monitoring stations in orbit around Earth began detecting massive fleet movements throughout the galaxy. Military forces from dozens of different species were mobilizing simultaneously, but instead of moving toward conflict zones or disputed territories, they were all moving in the same direction, toward the borders of human space. Dae Hyun, Earth's Minister of Interstellar Affairs, called an emergency cabinet meeting as reports flooded in from human colonies and outposts. Across their small portion of space, every human diplomatic mission had been suddenly isolated. Every trade agreement had been abruptly canceled, and every alien visitor to human space had departed without explanation. "It's like someone threw a switch and turned off the entire galaxy's relationship with humanity," Dae-hyun reported to the cabinet. "We've gone from having dozens of active diplomatic relationships to having none in less than 48 hours. The most disturbing reports came from human traders and explorers who had been traveling in alien space when the crisis began. Those who were lucky had been detained and told they would be returned to human space as soon as possible. Those who were unlucky had simply disappeared, and their ships were found drifting empty in space with no trace of what had happened to their crews. Back at the council headquarters, Young-suk watched in growing despair as ancient defense protocols activated. Across the galaxy, military systems that hadn't been used for 50,000 years suddenly came online, all designed for one specific purpose: containing the threat from Hadak Prime. Automated defense platforms in deep space began repositioning themselves to create a barrier around human space. Weapon systems that had been built by long-dead civilizations activated and began charging their power systems. Warning beacons that had been silent for millennia started broadcasting messages in dozens of ancient languages, all saying the same thing: the Hadak are stirring. The galaxy's reaction was coordinated in a way that should have been impossible, given the vast distances and communication delays involved. But as Young-suk analyzed the response patterns, she realized that this coordination had been planned long in advance. Every major civilization had contingency plans for this exact situation. Deep in their military archives were protocols labeled with variations of Hadak response or primary extinction event. and these protocols had been activated the moment the intelligence leak confirmed that humanity was entering an active phase. Within a week, human space was completely quarantined. Every trade route that led to human systems was blockaded by military forces. Every communication relay that could carry messages to or from human space was shut down. The galaxy had effectively amputated the entire Sol system and everything around it. The speed and coordination of the response revealed something that terrified the few council members who understood its implications. This wasn't the first time the galaxy had tried to contain humanity, and the infrastructure for quarantine had been maintained and updated continuously for 50,000 years. As reports came in from across the galaxy, a clear pattern emerged. Every major civilization had been secretly preparing for humanity's return. They had all known, on some level, that the peace of the past 50 millennia was temporary, and that eventually the Hadak would wake up again. The leaked intelligence had simply triggered a response that had been planned and prepared for thousands of generations. But even as the quarantine took effect, disturbing reports began reaching the Council from their monitoring stations. The isolation of humanity was having an unexpected effect. Instead of containing their expansion, it seemed to be accelerating it. Human military recruitment was spiking across their colonies. Defense spending had increased by 3,000% in the past month. Most disturbing of all, human exploration vessels had stopped following their previous peaceful patterns and were now actively probing the quarantine barriers, testing for weaknesses. Hai Jin, a human military analyst on Earth, noticed the changes in her own society with growing confusion and concern. Military academies that had struggled to find applicants were suddenly overwhelmed with volunteers. Defense contractors that had been laying off workers were now operating at maximum capacity. The human government had declared a state of emergency and begun mobilizing resources for what they called defending human interests against an unknown galactic threat. What terrified the Council observers was that humanity seemed to be responding to the quarantine instinctively, as if some genetic memory was being triggered by their isolation. Without understanding why they were being contained or who was containing them, humans were automatically preparing for war. The galaxy's attempt to prevent the next cycle of destruction was beginning to look like it had actually triggered it. Chang Ho, an elderly council archivist, spent his days reading through the final records left by previous civilizations that had tried to contain humanity. The pattern was always the same. Quarantine would hold for a while, humans would adapt and militarize in response to isolation, and then they would break free with technology and tactics that their captors couldn't match. As he read the ancient warnings one more time, Chang Ho realized that the galaxy might have made a terrible mistake. The final message from the last civilization to face the Hadak was crystal clear. They are strongest when cornered. They are most dangerous when they believe they are alone. If you find this message, you have already made the mistake. The silence was absolute and terrifying. Wu Jin stood in the Council's military command center and watched as the last communication relay between human and galactic space was shut down. Protocol Hadak was now fully active, and humanity had been completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy. The protocol itself was older than most civilizations. It had been passed down through 50,000 years of galactic history, maintained and updated by each generation of species that rose to prominence. The instructions were simple and terrifying. When the Hadak showed signs of awakening, cut all contact, establish maximum containment, and pray that this time would be different. Wu Jin had studied military history his entire career, but nothing had prepared him for implementing a strategy designed to contain an entire species. The resources being devoted to the quarantine were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of ships, millions of personnel, and weapon systems that represented the combined military might of dozens of civilizations. The quarantine barrier around human space was now complete. Every possible route in or out of human territory was blocked by military stations. Deep space sensors monitored every asteroid, every comet, every piece of space debris that might carry human technology or personnel beyond the containment zone. But even as the containment held, the reports coming from inside the quarantine zone were increasingly disturbing. Human society was transforming at a rate that seemed impossible, as if their isolation had triggered some kind of genetic programming that had been dormant for millennia. Sunmi watched the transformation with growing horror from her position on the Council's diplomatic committee. She had been one of the few voices arguing for a peaceful solution to the human situation, but the evidence of what was happening inside the quarantine zone was making her question whether peaceful coexistence had ever been possible. Human birth rates had spiked dramatically, but the increase was concentrated in specific genetic lines that analysis showed were optimized for military traits. Intelligence indicated that human governments had quietly implemented breeding programs designed to produce soldiers, engineers, and strategists. Educational systems across human space had been completely restructured. Children, as young as 5, were being trained in military tactics, weapons operation, and strategic thinking. Art, literature, and music had been replaced with courses on logistics, engineering, and what human schools were calling expansion planning. The transformation wasn't being imposed by human governments. It was happening spontaneously across all human colonies simultaneously, as if the entire species was responding to some instinctive understanding that they were now in a survival situation that required complete militarization. Inside the quarantine zone, humans were asking questions that their leaders couldn't answer. Daehyun found himself facing increasing pressure from human military commanders who wanted to know why they were being isolated and what threat they were supposed to be defending against. "Minister, we need to know what we're dealing with, General," Park said during a cabinet meeting. "Our scouts are reporting massive alien military buildups all around our territory, but we have no idea what we've done to provoke this response." Daehyun had no answers to give. The last communication they had received from the Galactic Council was a formal notice that all diplomatic relations were being suspended indefinitely for galactic security reasons. No explanation, no negotiation, no possibility of appeal. "Have to assume that we're facing an existential threat," Daehyun told the military leadership. "Whatever has happened, the entire galaxy apparently considers humanity to be dangerous enough to warrant complete isolation." The military response was swift and comprehensive. Human colonies began constructing massive defensive installations, human shipyards shifted to military production, and human exploration fleets were recalled and converted to combat vessels. What the Council observers found most disturbing was that humans seemed to know exactly how to prepare for a galactic war, despite having no previous experience with large-scale interstellar conflict. Their military doctrine, their strategic planning, and their tactical innovations all showed a sophistication that should have taken centuries to develop. Chang-ho spent his final days reviewing the ancient records and trying to understand how the galaxy had ended up repeating the same mistakes that had doomed previous civilizations. The warnings had been clear. Isolating humanity would only make them more dangerous. But fear had overridden wisdom, and now the galaxy was watching the same pattern play out again. The Hadak were responding to containment exactly as they had 50,000 years ago, and the outcome was becoming increasingly predictable. Reports from inside the quarantine zone showed that human technology was advancing at an impossible rate. Innovations that should have taken decades were being developed in months. Human physicists had made breakthrough discoveries in faster-than-light travel. Human engineers had designed weapons systems that Council analysts couldn't understand. And human strategists were developing battle plans that seemed to anticipate every possible galactic response. The most terrifying development was that humans had somehow developed technology that could penetrate the quarantine barriers undetected. Scout ships were beginning to appear in systems far beyond the containment zone, gathering intelligence on galactic military dispositions and identifying strategic targets. Hae-jin found herself assigned to a project that she didn't fully understand, but that filled her with a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. Human scientists and military planners were working together to develop what they called liberation protocols, strategies for breaking free from the galactic containment and establishing human dominance over the species that had imprisoned them. The work felt natural to her in a way that was both exhilarating and disturbing. She found herself thinking in terms of conquest and expansion rather than defense and survival. The idea of spreading human civilization across the galaxy didn't seem like an ambitious goal. It felt like an inevitable destiny. Across human space, similar changes were occurring in millions of individuals simultaneously. Humans who had lived peaceful lives as farmers, artists, and scholars were voluntarily enlisting in military service. Parents were encouraging their children to pursue careers in warfare and conquest. Scientists were redirecting their research toward developing more efficient methods of destroying alien civilizations. The transformation wasn't being driven by government propaganda or military pressure. It was emerging from something deep in human psychology that the isolation had awakened. Council intelligence agencies watched in growing desperation as their containment strategy not only failed to prevent human militarization, but actually accelerated it. Every month that passed saw human capabilities grow and their containment barriers become less effective. The reports reaching the Council leadership painted a picture that was becoming increasingly familiar from the ancient records. A species that had seemed manageable when integrated into galactic civilization was proving to be utterly unstoppable when forced to rely on their own resources and instincts. In the final intelligence report, before communication with the quarantine, monitoring stations was lost. Council analysts estimated that humanity would achieve breakthrough within 2 years. They had developed technologies that made the containment barriers useless, military capabilities that matched or exceeded anything the galaxy could deploy against them, and strategic plans that suggested they understood galactic civilization better than the species that had created it. The last message received from a monitoring station inside the quarantine zone was brief and terrifying. They're not trying to break out anymore. They're preparing to break everything. Chang Ho's final archive entry, written as reports of human breakthrough attempts reached the Council, contained a warning for whoever might find the records after the current galactic civilization joined the ranks of the extinct. We believed we could contain them through isolation, but isolation only made them stronger. We thought we could control them through fear, but fear only made them more determined. They are what they have always been, the galaxy's ultimate predators, and we have just reminded them that they are hungry. The galaxy had gone silent about humanity, but the silence wasn't protecting anyone. It was simply giving the Haddock time to prepare for their return to their ancient role as the devourers of civilizations. In the growing darkness between the stars, humanity was awakening to its true nature, and this time they understood exactly who their enemies were and how to defeat them. The cycle was beginning again, and the galaxy had no more options left to try.